After horrific events disrupted the quiet and unhurried lives of the residents of the tiny town of Maymay in the southern Philippines, Lavella Maguad finally received permission from law enforcement to clean her own home, which had been the scene of a terrible crime. As she wiped down the surfaces, she reflected on the fact that not long ago, these rooms were filled with prosperity, stability, laughter, and warmth. And then, someone ruthless had cruelly and inhumanely taken the lives of her 2 children, after which the shadow of tragedy had consumed all familiar life. It wasn't easy for Lavelle to touch the pieces of furniture that still held the memories of her children, but cleaning distracted her from the heavy emotions, creating a temporary sense of control at least over the order of the house, and she found in this control a temporary refuge from the emotional pain, because she also has an adopted daughter, Janice, who miraculously managed to survive the terrible massacre and for whom she must remain strong. In recent days, the grieving mother could only cry, scream, curl up in a ball, and for long hours went deep into herself, although she realized how hard it must be for Janice, who was the only witness to the crime. Reaching her foster daughter's room, Lavella concentrated especially on cleaning. Suddenly, she found an ID card that definitely shouldn't have been in the girl's room. The ID belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Merlin. Lavella immediately went to the police station to report the find. The ID probably belongs to one of the 3 burglars that Janice had previously reported, she said. The police officers listened carefully to the woman, and the ID did indeed go a long way toward bringing the crime closer to being solved. However, they were not at all surprised, as by this point they were pretty sure who, how, and why killed Gwen and Louis Maguad on December 10, 2021. On September 22, 2013, long before the events at the Maguad's home, a 9-year-old girl, unable to bear the lack of parental love, care, poverty, beatings, and physical hunger, stood on the dock and stared hopelessly into the water. A lonely, quiet child caught the attention of a woman passing by. When asked what she was doing here alone and if she needed help, the girl looked up and quietly replied, "My name is Janice Sebial. I have no parents, and for some reason I don't remember anything." The woman decided that the child had suffered some kind of shock that caused her memory loss. Perhaps something terrible had happened to her. The woman took the girl to the nearest police station, where she was assured that the child would be taken care of. Janice was placed in temporary custody, and they tried to find her parents. Time passed. The search yielded nothing. The girl did not remember anything about her life. No one ever reported the child missing, and after a while the girl was officially recognized as an orphan, transferred to the permanent care of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, which, in general, did not sadden the child at all. For the first time, she had plenty of food, clothes, and a lot of friendly attention from adults. As it turned out, Janice did not lose her memory, but the defense mechanisms of the child's consciousness, having experienced so many traumatic events, pushed away the memories of family and home. Being an orphan meant staying in a new and better life. That's what she did. Even then, Janice had her first, not yet fully realized, experience of how to behave so that others would want to help you. Unfortunately, the events of 2013 were not a one-time ticket to a new life, but a mechanism for getting what she wanted. Cruz and Lavelle Maguad were known to others as a well-meaning married couple. Cruz worked as a teacher at the local high school, while his wife ran an elementary school. The couple raised 2 wonderful children. Incredibly intelligent, 18-year-old Beauty Gwen participated in all extracurricular activities and was a member of the Girl Scouts. The girl dreamed of a career as a doctor and even, wanting to test herself, enrolled in her last year of high school in a preparatory medical school. 16-year-old Louis became the soul of any company in which he came. He easily made friends, was open, played guitar, sang, and painted. At all, this young man showed extreme responsibility, liked to help everyone, and planned to achieve success in law. Parents were proud of their children, helped them in everything, and supported their plans and desires. The family led a measured life, attended church, and did charity work. At one of the charity events in the church, Gwen and met Janice, where she came as a nanny to look after the children. The girls became instant friends, and became best friends overnight. Almost the same age, they were fun and funky. They often posted dance videos on TikTok and came up with interesting ways to spend their time. Luis enjoyed participating in their activities. It didn't take long for all three of them to become best friends. At one point, her brother and sister wondered why Janice was working instead of attending school, and Janice told them that she was an orphan. Her parents died of illness when she was very young, so she has had to rely solely on government assistance since she was a child. In order to be able to buy something for herself, she has to work part-time instead of studying. The girl complained that the couple who gave her a job pays very little, and the money received is enough only for food, and she has to work almost around the clock. Later, Janice repeatedly shared her fears about the future with her new friends. Since she is about to turn 18, she is about to lose some social benefits, intended only for minors, and perhaps she will not even have anything to pay for housing. Education and a good career are all but forgotten. Kind-hearted Gwen, heartened by her friend's plight, decided to lend her a helping hand and went to her parents. She told them about the difficult, tragic life of a new acquaintance and asked them to adopt Janice so that she had a roof over her head and conditions for studying. She assured the parents that everyone would benefit. Janice would be able to get an education, help share the housework, and help Louis with his homework. The Maguads were skeptical at first. They worked as teachers, their income was low, they could hardly afford another child, and besides, there was no extra room in their house for Janice. Louis even volunteered to sleep on the living room couch and gave up his room. The parents couldn't stand their daughter and son's repeated requests and agreed. In July 2021, the Maguads officially adopted Janice. They enrolled her in school, and she even took their last name. Janice turned out to be a smart and very polite girl. She accepted all the rules in the house. Cruz and Lavella wanted their children to grow up to be responsible and disciplined people who would know the value of work and money, and so they introduced them to the household. Janice was given exactly the same amount of housework as her sister and brother. The girl gladly performed her share of the duties and always showed respect for her foster parents. To show her gratitude to the family, she would sometimes get up early and cook breakfast for everyone. The couple realized that they had not just helped the girl, as Gwen had asked them to do, but had indeed unexpectedly gained a second daughter, albeit a very old one. At one point, Janice even called them Mom and Dad. On December 10th, 2021, at 2:58 in the afternoon, Cruz, who was checking his middle school homework, received a phone call from a neighbor who hurriedly told him, "Go home soon, but don't panic before time." Janice left a strange post on Facebook. "Your house appears to have been burglarized." Cruz immediately put work on hold, called his wife, who was also at work at that moment, and rushed home. On the way, he tried to call his children, but they didn't answer. The worried father drove home at top speed, more worried about the safety of his children than the money in the house. At about 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz pulled up to the house. The door to the house appeared to be locked, so he went to the back door, walked around the house, and entered through a second entrance. Everywhere was a mess. Cruz went from room to room and called the kids by name. When he reached the living room, he saw something no parent should ever see. Luis and Gwen were lying on the floor covered in blood. Luis lay in the living room with his hands tied behind his back, a towel stuffed in his mouth and scars all over his body. He found his eldest daughter, Gwen, not far from the bedroom door, her entire body covered in cuts and blood. They were most definitely dead. With a noise in his head, on absorbent cotton legs, Cruz suddenly realized that there had to be a third person in the house. He started screaming as hard as he could, "Janice! Janice!" At one point, Cruz heard a quiet voice say, "Daddy!" Turning around, Cruz was relieved to see that Janice was alive, hugged her, and noticed that her hair was wet. He asked why it was wet, and the girl replied that she had just gotten out of the shower, and therefore, because of the water, did not hear his call. Of course, her grief-stricken father thought her answer was strange, but he decided that Janice wanted to wash away the horror she had experienced. After all, many people in shocking situations begin to behave strangely. After making sure she was unharmed, the man called the police. Police arriving on the scene found a hammer, a baseball bat, a knife, and a broken wine bottle near the victims. Under normal circumstances, having more than one means of committing a crime means there is more than one perpetrator. The police turned all of these items over to the appropriate officers, hoping to find fingerprints on them, and proceeded to search the house and collect evidence near and around it. They also advised Cruz and Lavelle to carefully examine the items to see what was missing. Very carefully, the officers conducted a detailed interview with Janice, the only survivor. She told them that she and Gwen were in the room, and Louis was in the living room when they heard screaming and the sounds of a fight. She and Gwen immediately went to check what had happened and saw two masked robbers hitting Luis with a hammer and a baseball bat, and a third man with a knife. Terrified at what they saw, they gave themselves away with a muffled shriek. One of the thugs chased after Gwen. According to Janice, he didn't notice her. She took advantage of the moment, ran into the small bedroom, locked the door, and hid under the bed. There she lay in shock, not daring to move. When she came to her senses, she sent a text message asking for help to her mother Lavelle, but her mother did not answer. She was afraid to call the police to avoid giving herself away by ringing or the sound of her voice, so 12 minutes after texting her mom, she wrote 2 messages for help on her Facebook page. "Help. There are strangers in my house. I can only hide in my room right now. I don't want to die." One of those messages was seen by a neighbor who called Cruz. 3 days after the terrible event which struck all residents of the town with its unbearable cruelty, the Philippine police created a special investigative team, including the best staff and specialists. On December 15th, the investigation team said that a large amount of evidence and clues have been collected, and the nature of the case is temporarily classified as robbery and murder. But they do not rule out other versions and will conduct an in-depth investigation. By other theories, the investigation team members meant their growing belief that Janice was the key figure in the crime. Specialists compared evidence from the crime scene and witness statements with Janice's and found several very large discrepancies that allowed them to list the girl as a suspect rather than a witness. First, nothing was missing from the house, which seemed illogical if the 3 bandits were planning a robbery. Cruz and Lavella said that all the valuables and money were in place, despite the fact that the house was turned upside down. Only Gwen's cell phone was missing. Second, the investigation team found a plastic bag containing bloody pants and shirt in a creek near Cruz's home. It was confirmed that the blood stains on the clothes belonged to the murdered men. It appeared that the perpetrator, or one of the perpetrators, changed into clean clothes after the murder and then fled. That is, he was unusually calm after committing the crime, indicating premeditation and planning. In a robbery that went wrong and ended in multiple murders, the perpetrator would likely have panicked and tried to get away as quickly as possible, rather than waste time searching for clean clothes and changing clothes, especially since the parents of the murdered men did not confirm that any articles of clothing were missing. And it is highly unlikely that the perpetrator would have thrown the bloody clothes into the stream behind the house. Moreover, there were signs at the scene that indicated an emotional crime, not a cold-blooded one. There were too many wounds and fractures found on the bodies of the brother and sister. Gwen even had one ear torn off. Most of the injuries were to her face. The autopsy took 2 full days. Such a scene seems more like anger venting for revenge or jealousy, rather than calculation. The perpetrator was clearly very angry. The nature of the crime clearly indicated a personal grudge killing. Third, according to the forensic medical report, the older sister died before the younger brother, which contradicted Janice's testimony, because according to her, the younger brother was attacked first, and with as many wounds as Janice described, it was unlikely that he could have outlived his sister, who had been bleeding for quite some time. Fourthly, the murder weapons were the property of the family. The perpetrators did not bring them with them. The hammer belonged to the head of the family, and he kept it in the laundry room drawer. Cruz was sure that only his eldest daughters Gwen and Janice knew where the hammer was kept. A baseball bat found at the scene, according to the parents' testimony, belonged to their youngest son, who kept it on the second tier of the bed, under a blanket. Burglars who are suddenly caught in the act don't run around the house looking for a hammer and bat, stored in non-obvious places. They either bring their own murder weapons or use available items. It turns out, the location of the 2 key tools of this crime were known only to the people living in the house. Cruz and Lavelle have alibis. That leaves Janice, who knew where the hammer and baseball bat were kept. Louis gave her his room, so she was aware of the strange location of the item. So even if she wasn't the killer, she was probably an accomplice, since the perpetrator wasn't alone. Fifth, when Lavella received a text message from Janice asking for help, she immediately called back, but Janice did not answer and later said that after not receiving a response from her mother, she published a Facebook post. Dispatch data confirmed Lavelle's call. The Facebook post, quite long and with emoticons, somehow did not fit with the behavior of a person afraid to even move. Sixth, shock and panic could not explain taking a shower instead of calling the police. A person is usually most vulnerable in the shower, plus the water muffles the sounds of approaching footsteps. So why did Janice shower and wash her hair while she claimed she was afraid of the 3 unknown men, since they might not have left? If Janice had no doubt that the burglars were already gone and wasn't afraid to give herself away by making noises, then why didn't she call the police before taking a shower? Well, and most importantly, the autopsy revealed that Gwen and Louis passed away around 2 p.m., which meant Janice waited about 48 minutes to start texting her foster mom and waited an hour to post on Facebook. The room she hid in was ransacked. It seemed the perpetrators had scrutinized every corner of the small room, but hadn't noticed Janice. How could that be? By the time Lavelle entered the police station with Merlin's ID, the investigation team had already received the lab report. Janice's fingerprints had been found on the hammer and baseball bat used as the murder weapons. Of course, the implements could have had the prints of the people living in the house, but given the other inconsistencies, she was the prime suspect. Janice was brought to the station for formal questioning on December 18th. She was told about the ID she had found, the results of the forensic examination, and all the inconsistencies. Unexpectedly for the detectives, Janice immediately confessed to the crime. She revealed that she and Merlin had killed Gwen and Louise. Shortly after the confession, Janice and Merlin were arrested. Gwen's cell phone, the only missing item from the crime scene, was found in the young man's belongings. Both young men were charged with first-degree murder and sent to juvenile detention without bail. It is still unknown how Janice and Merlin met and what their relationship was. It is only known that Merlin was the same age as the girl and worked in the church, preparing everything necessary for church services. The young people were friends on Facebook. Having studied their correspondence, investigators learned that they planned to kill Gwen and Louise since December 1st. That is, 10 days before the tragedy. Cruz and Lavella were distraught and could hardly believe what was happening. Janice had always seemed so quiet and well-mannered. They kindly took her in and treated her like their own daughter, and their children loved the girl like a sister. Why? Why did she do such a thing? Why? Janice attributed it to envy of Gwen. A well-to-do family, loving parents, she resented why she never got what Gwen got effortlessly. In her opinion, the adoption was nothing more than cheap sympathy and a way for family members to validate themselves at the expense of her difficult life. I felt like a stray dog that had been picked up. If the Maguads had known how Janice really felt, they would have tried to help her understand, but they didn't. Janice skillfully hid everything behind niceness, and she didn't make breakfast out of gratitude, but felt obliged to do so. Janice was very angry about all the housework the Maguads made her do, believing them to be hypocrites and treating her like a servant rather than a daughter. As soon as the news of Janice's confession became known, there was an uproar in the town. All the residents could not believe that a 17-year-old orphan girl had committed such a brutal crime. People began to compare her to the heroine of the movie Orphan, because of which the number of adoptions had already dropped once. As the uproar continued to grow, the investigative team looked into Janice's past and found her mother and 2 younger brothers. Turns out, Janice wasn't an orphan. When she was very young, her family lived in great poverty. Her father gambled and spent all the family money on gambling. The family was almost constantly starving. In 2013, the girl ran away from home. Standing on that pier, she accepted the help of a concerned woman out of desperation. Having received food, care, and warmth, almost for the first time in her life, she realized that the best solution would be never to remember her parents and brothers again. Her family wasn't looking for her. The lack of an extra mouth only made their lives easier, and there was no money for searching. Perhaps her mother secretly hoped that her daughter was in better circumstances. Since then, Janice realized that pretending to be an orphan is profitable, so you can get sympathy, food, and clothes instead of hunger and beatings, and she can hardly be blamed for that conclusion. Since discovering the truth about the difficult childhood, the motive has become clearer. No one could have imagined the extent to which a traumatized and possibly mentally unstable child would be adopted by the Maguad family. In telling Gwen about her difficult life and the imminent lack of payments and housing, Janice had absolutely counted on an invitation to stay at her friend's house. She was used to playing on sympathy, was ready to pay for cleaning and looking after Louis, but the girl hardly expected that the Maguad family would go so far as to adopt. It opened up numerous childhood traumas. All her time in the Maguad family had been spent observing the normal lives of other children, longing for such a life, feeling her own inferiority, abandonment, and carefully constructed psychological defense mechanisms. She was used to surviving and knew well how to do it. And suddenly, she had it all. Everything she'd ever dreamed of. Having never seen enough care and love from her relatives, she didn't know how to accept such care and didn't understand how one could feel well-being. In her new family, it became difficult for her to accept kindness as something natural. She was constantly looking for a catch. She experienced the usual fear for the future but did not find it reflected in reality. The care and love her adopted daughter received was filtered through her own experiences and emotional wounds. Instead of reassurance, Janice felt tension. She didn't know how to be a daughter, but she knew how to be a hired worker. With the allotted amount of tasks, she explained to herself what was happening. What this house really wanted was a free worker, not a daughter. Everyone was just playing noble and reveling in their charity. Tension began to turn into hatred and a desire for revenge for being treated like a picked-up stray dog. The better the family treated Janice, the more resentment grew in her heart of hearts. She felt like a stranger and was jealous of Lavelle and Gwen. The more love Lavella showed her daughters, the more jealousy Janice felt. Unable to deal with such emotions, love and care turned into a source of fear and hatred. She experienced rage and frustration, feeling even more inferior and misunderstood. This distorted perception became a breeding ground for a desire for revenge against those who she felt had simply taken advantage of her trust. Numerous studies of child psychology emphasize the importance of psychological support for children who have experienced difficult periods and emotional trauma, especially in the adoption process. But unfortunately, no one guessed about Janice's past and the emotional traumas she had experienced. The desire to help the orphaned girl turned into a nightmare for the Maguad family, ruthless and irreparable. Gwen and Louise were buried in a private cemetery on December 20th, 2021. More than 1,000 people attended the funeral and all expressed their grief. Janice and Merlin were tried separately, but the young men received identical sentences, 32 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When they get out of prison, they will be in their 50s and still have a whole life ahead of them that Gwen, Louise, Cruz, and Lavelle will now not have. A horrific crime has shattered the Maguad family forever. Their act of kindness has been rewarded in the most horrific way imaginable. After surviving the horror, it's very difficult to remain kind and strong, but Cruz and Lavella succeeded. In August 2022, the couple opened a restaurant in honor of their fallen children that serves their favorite dishes. The couple are undergoing psychotherapy and plan to use their business to keep the memory of Gwen and Louise alive. This story unfolded in Washington, in Spokane, the state's second-largest city. Situated along the river of the same name, it's the heart of the so-called Inland Northwest. The city's name originates from the Spokane tribe, translating from the Salishan languages of the local Native Americans as Children of the Sun. However, in today's world, Spokane is notorious for its dichotomy. As beautiful and appealing as it is to tourists on the outside, it can be just as dangerous for its residents. According to state data, Spokane County has the highest crime rate in Washington, doubling the state's average. Law enforcement reports that a majority of local-level offenses are connected to domestic violence. And so, today's tale of a young Cinderella has a pretty exterior and a bitter taste within. The Holden family, a typical American household, had long resided in Spokane. They adored children, hence the home was always full of them. Judy and John Holden had 2 daughters and an adopted son, Joshua. The adult daughters had left the nest and lived independently for some time. However, their only son, Joshua, remained with his parents. The large, melancholic, and perpetually gloomy young man hadn't managed to start his own family and was thus reluctantly staying in his parental home. The care for children in this family was expressed in an unconventional manner. It began and ended with merely providing shelter. Judy and John didn't spoil their foster children with attention and care. All the foster children lived according to a strict schedule and were punished for misdeeds. The children became a small family enterprise. The desire to have a stable income in the form of significant benefits compelled the Holden family to take not just 1 or 2 children from the shelter. Judy had an educational background and had her own grown children with successful destinies. Hence, the guardianship authorities trusted the family and initially placed children with them for foster care and then, upon mutual agreement, for adoption. Thus, one day, a sweet 4-year-old girl named Courtney appeared in the Holden family. Courtney Corin Holden was born on February 28, 1992, and ended up in the shelter 2 years later. Life in the shelter was not joyful for the girl, as it was for all children there. Every new day in the orphanage began with a prayer. Children of various ages dreamily prayed to the Almighty to give them a mom and dad, and one joyful day, the girl's wishes were fulfilled. Little Courtney went to Spokane. Courtney was just 4 years old when she first stepped into the Holdens' home. She started living with Joshua and several other foster children. When the door closed behind her, the girl's dreams of a caring and loving family remained just dreams. If life in the shelter seemed sad and joyless to Courtney, at the Holdens, it turned into a real nightmare. From her early childhood, she was forced to do all kinds of housework. She had to clean the whole house, wash dishes for all the family members after every meal, and if she made a mistake, she was punished. What was especially surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children much better, and no one could understand the reason for their hatred of this pretty girl. Judy Holden was already of a considerable age by then, and Courtney became the last child they took from the orphanage. Perhaps it was in this that their inexplicable malice and hatred towards the girl was hidden. Courtney was even forbidden from going outside without permission. People who visited their home often heard Judy and Joshua mistreating Courtney, calling her Cinderella, as if she were a fairy tale character who, in real life, was a stepmother's and evil sister's slave. Courtney found herself in a similar role. However, the girl was very responsive, and over the years living with the Holdens, got used to the harsh conditions. She feared her foster mother, and her brother Joshua instilled terror in the girl with just his presence. He forbade her from socializing with peers. She had no mobile phone or other modern conveniences. She never left the house without necessity and permission. A breath of fresh air, as well as chatting with neighbors, was something she enjoyed only when the house was empty, stepping out into the backyard. Courtney's upbringing was under such conditions. Over time, she grew into an adult and simply got used to her life. She didn't become bitter, but always treated her foster parents with respect, as she knew no other life and had no concept of a normal family. Courtney gained a bit of freedom when Joshua, due to irreconcilable differences with the parents, moved to his sister's place for a considerable time. For Courtney, this was the happiest time of her life. She finally experienced the long-awaited taste of freedom, could freely leave the house, stroll, and meet with peers. Time passed. Courtney finished school and fell in love for the first time. Michael was a worthy partner for her. She felt care and attention from a man she had never received from anyone. After each meeting, Courtney was on cloud 9. Their relationship lasted until 2011 when they had a son. Desperately, Michael pleaded with his beloved to move in with him and live as a full family. But for some unknown reason, the young mother refused him and did not move, continuing to live in the despised Holden's house, and ended all romantic relations with Michael. By that time, the Holden house had become empty. The foster children had grown up and moved out. John Holden, Courtney's foster father, had passed away, so for a long time, she lived only with her foster mother Judy and her child. Michael was allowed to visit his son exclusively with the stepmother's permission. During the period when Courtney's brother Joshua was absent, their life with the little son was quite peaceful. But after the father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to fiercely terrorize the family home. He installed many surveillance cameras around their house on Hero Avenue, about a block from Rogers Middle School in northeast Spokane. Signs reading, "Smile, you're on camera," were scattered all over the yard, with several cameras pointing in different directions. The surveillance cameras made Courtney anxious again, as she knew venturing outside would bring trouble from Joshua for escaping. Courtney's life became unbearable once more. Around 2015, Courtney confided to a neighbor that she was once again not allowed to have a mobile phone, manage social media accounts, talk to anyone outside her family, drive a car, or even leave the house without Joshua's permission. The birth of her child had so embittered Joshua Holden that he forced the young woman to cease all contact with her son's father. Courtney silently complied. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms, and when they inquired about their origin, she candidly admitted, "Joshua hits me." Concerned neighbors wondered why Courtney endured such treatment and tried in every way to help her. They contacted the police to draw attention to Courtney's plight, but the Holdens managed to quash the case each time, as the victim herself never openly admitted to being under family terror from her brother. Eventually, Courtney was deprived of the privilege of talking to neighbors, who since then only saw her outside in the evenings, as she was not allowed out during the day. Courtney silently obeyed again. No one knew Joshua like Courtney did. A tall, large, and overweight man, he possessed enormous physical strength and never held back in insults. Joshua's friends described him as a man with a paranoid disposition, cruel and unpredictable in nature. He once bragged publicly about his ability to easily end a life and dispose of the body without difficulty. He had a notable criminal record. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but due to a lack of evidence and the victim's unwillingness to cooperate with the police, he was released. He was also suspected of an assault and misconduct against a woman in 2003 when the perpetrator could not be identified. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for domestic violence against his mother and for burglary. These incidents prompted his flight from the parental home for several years. Upon his return, Joshua became even more ferocious. He installed cameras not just outside but also inside the house to keep complete control over Courtney. The young mother almost stopped communicating with friends, mentioning she was afraid to go anywhere for fear Joshua would find out and things would get worse. One person communicated with Courtney every day through Facebook until Joshua discovered she had an account. "I have to go. I must leave. Josh is coming," she said in her last message nearly 2 years ago. Then, her account went dark permanently. The dynamics within the Holden household were described by family acquaintances as peculiar. People familiar with the family were puzzled as to why Courtney's child referred to Judy as Mom and Joshua as Dad, while his biological mother was mentioned strictly by her first name. This led some to speculate that perhaps Joshua was indeed the child's father. Neighbors and acquaintances condemned the Holdens for their unusual lifestyle and antisocial behavior, opting to steer clear of their home. In August 2018, following yet another dispute, Courtney hastily packed her belongings into a suitcase and ran out onto the street. An irate Judy shouted after her, "Come back home," to which Courtney replied, "I won't stay here anymore." Moments later, an enraged Joshua, standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds, forcibly lifted 160-pound Courtney and carried her back into the house. Judy slammed the door shut. According to a neighbor, she couldn't resist. This was the last time that this neighbor, and possibly anyone outside the household, saw Courtney. The young woman who had lived a life of invisibility remained so. It took almost 2 years before neighbors and acquaintances started to worry about her disappearance. In October 2019, a year and a half after she vanished, concern for Courtney Holden's whereabouts came from her child's father and his current girlfriend. They hadn't seen Courtney for almost 2 years, and the father was eager to see his child. The father of Courtney's son filed a missing person report with the police. On October 24th, the police, armed with a search warrant, went to the Holden residence and were surprised to find Courtney indeed not there. Neither Joshua nor Judy was willing to cooperate with the authorities. Courtney's stepmother allowed detectives to peek into her room, but then asked them to leave the house as soon as possible. Search dogs were even brought in, but to no avail. The Holdens claimed that Courtney had abandoned her son and ran away. They couldn't explain who could continue to cash the Social Security benefits deposited into her account or who was using the electronic food stamps. However, on the same day the search was conducted at the Holden home, Judy and Joshua withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. A coincidence occurred the next day when an unknown woman, claiming to be Courtney, called the National Center for Criminal Information in America. She stated she was safe and did not want to be searched for. Police traced the call and identified the woman as one of Courtney's stepsisters. Later, Joshua and Judy told many contradictory stories about Courtney's disappearance. Once they claimed she ran away with a truck driver, and in another version, it was a secret lover she had hidden from everyone. Courtney's absence and the constantly varying statements from those she lived with made the Holdens suspect. Clearly having something to hide, Joshua and Judy Holden hastily left Spokane by the end of October 2019. Their flight only convinced detectives of their involvement in Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens were tracked down in Texas at the home of one of Judy's adopted daughters. Authorities were able to charge them with cashing benefits intended for Courtney, as well as with identity theft, which allowed for their arrest and detention in a Texas jail. The Spokane Police Department attempted a welfare check on Courtney in early October, but it quickly turned into a missing person case handed over to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser. Lesser spoke with the Spokesman Review about the investigation after the search warrants he filed in the Spokane County Superior Court became public. This report on Courtney's disappearance and the investigation is based on police interviews and court records. Courtney was officially declared missing. Alerts were sent to all states, and several news broadcasts featured the missing person case, initiating an extensive search for her. When patrol officers and detectives visited the home for various reasons, Joshua and Judy Holden refused to cooperate with the investigation, an unusual behavior when it comes to welfare checks and missing persons cases. On the day Courtney was declared missing, a woman claiming to be her called Crime Check to say she was fine. The police dispatcher also spoke with the woman claiming to be Courtney. Later, it was discovered that it was actually Courtney's sister, who did not tell Lesser why she had impersonated her, presumably to deflect suspicion from Judy and halt the search efforts. "I'm concerned that she might potentially be deceased," Lesser said in an interview with the Spokesman Review. Lesser expressed particular concern about Joshua's history of violence. Joshua had been charged with assault in the past, but the case was dropped shortly before trial when the victim ceased cooperating with the prosecution. Investigators were in the process of obtaining DNA evidence, and court documents from that case indicated that Holden was suspected in another assault back in 2003. Neighbors and family described Joshua as unstable, cruel, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. A neighbor mentioned that Joshua was unemployed and Judy feared him. Joshua had also been arrested on charges related to unlawful imprisonment and domestic violence, and he had been convicted of burglary. Family members said that Joshua and Judy boasted to them about knowing ways to evade the police, and Joshua made comments about how easy it would be to end someone's life and hide the body. "People don't just disappear, especially when they have a child," Lesser remarked. Court documents stated that Courtney was a loving mother who would never abandon her child. Over the 1.5 years Courtney was not seen outside her home, Joshua and Judy told neighbors and family she was traveling with a boyfriend, an unnamed truck driver nobody met. Sometimes rumors circulated that she had run off with a fiancé. Other times, she was supposedly just inside the house but unavailable for visits. Judy told Lesser that Courtney had been home just a few days before when he knocked on their door in early October. She said Courtney left on foot with her son. When Lesser asked for Judy's phone number, she locked the door in his face, according to court documents. She then reluctantly allowed the police inside to see Courtney's room. She became very nervous, said Lesser. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of items covering all available space on counters, Lesser wrote in the court documents. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress was bare. It appeared as though no one had lived there, Lesser observed. At one point, Judy panicked upon losing sight of one of the detectives behind a closed door. She ordered the investigators to leave when Lesser asked to check the rest of the house for Courtney's child. Later that day, a neighbor told Lesser they saw Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leaving in a van with a child. Detective Lesser also found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic illness, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. She received her last prescription in July 2018, though she had been getting medications every month before disappearing. Despite the gap in medical records, money continued to be withdrawn from Courtney's bank account every month, and her EBT card was used for grocery shopping. Surveillance footage confirmed Joshua and Judy shopping with a small child. Cameras also recorded the couple withdrawing the remaining money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was declared missing in early October. By October 24th, Joshua and Judy had left their home. Lesser wrote that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone when police arrived to execute the search warrant. Mobile numbers associated with Joshua and Judy were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers on the account were activated on the same day with Texas area codes. About a month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called the police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband who had flown in from Texas to check on the property. They said they hadn't seen Courtney for 2 years and that Judy had retired. The man told the police that Joshua and Judy had a child, but Judy's daughter stated the child was Courtney's. In mid-December, Lesser traveled to Texas in search of Joshua and Judy. The police found them at Judy's daughter's house, along with Courtney's son. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested on charges of identity theft, interference with custody, and for using Courtney's bank accounts and concealing her child. The child was found safe and was successfully returned to his father. No criminal charges were made against other family members. The police searched Judy's Spokane home with search dogs, but unfortunately found no trace of Courtney. Searches of the home in Texas also yielded no clues to Courtney's whereabouts. Officers also searched a vehicle and trailer owned by Judy, parked at an RV lot in Oklahoma. 40-year-old Joshua and 74-year-old Judy were in jail in Texas, where they declined to be interviewed by the police. They refused to be extradited to Spokane, so the police awaited a governor's warrant for their return. Since the police could not prove their involvement in Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This is probably one of the deepest missing person cases, Lesser said about the months-long investigation. I have 4 notebooks full of different information. Judy and Joshua still claim they have nothing to do with Courtney's disappearance, while the police believe she is likely deceased, but unfortunately cannot yet prove it. Domestic violence experts point out several factors why cases like Courtney Holden's are not always reported. One is the social assumption that someone else will take care of it, according to Morgan Colburn, the Director of Counseling, Advocacy, and Outreach at YWCA. Colburn mentioned that fear of retaliation could also be a factor. And sometimes people see it as a family matter, something that needs to be dealt with at home, he said. Despite the aforementioned charges, Judy and Joshua have not been charged with anything directly related to Courtney's disappearance. Many still believe they know what happened to Courtney. In addition to Joshua's known aggressive behavior, he had also stated he could end someone's life and successfully hide the body from the police. Investigators believe Courtney is deceased, but they have not made any arrests related to her case yet. Summing up today's story, it's heartbreakingly clear that Courtney was unfortunate to become part of the Holden family, and this young girl, who dreamed of family and love, lacked the courage to stand up for herself. She wholeheartedly believed that even these people, who yelled at her, mistreated her, and forced her to work for them, or her family. But should one really need to defend themselves from their own family? It's a profound regret that the bold claims made by Joshua Holden in public about being able to end a life and hide a body cannot be used as evidence of his involvement in Courtney's disappearance. Especially since after that fateful evening, when he forcefully took her back into the house, she was never seen again, and no one knows what she had to endure in those dreadful moments and what atrocities were committed behind closed doors by these monsters who called themselves parents. There are countless ways to discreetly dispose of a body using various chemicals that neither experts can identify nor police dogs can detect. This suggests that if Courtney was harmed that evening, her spirit still lingers in the Holden estate, where she sought a family, but found her demise instead. Her young son was removed from the Holden household and placed under the care of his father, where he remains to this day. Courtney Holden is still listed as missing. If you have any information that could aid the investigation, please contact the Spokane Police Department.
The case of Austin Harif, a handsome honor student, athlete, and cannibal. Can a young, physically healthy, and strong man suddenly lose his mind, turning into a wild beast? And if such a transformation does occur, where should one search for the root cause of this drastic change? Experts believe that such mental disorders are often hereditary, can be the result of traumatic experiences, substance abuse, or social isolation. Austin Harif's case stands out. It's not just a sudden bout of madness, a wild frenzy, or a personality disorder. Medical professionals have classified his condition as clinical delirium of lycanthropy, and the press has dubbed him a cannibal. It's believed that the young man suffers from a rare psychiatric syndrome where the patient believes they are transforming into an animal. However, the families of the victims, both injured and deceased from his transformations, are convinced that Harif feigned insanity to avoid accountability. Harif himself did not hide the fact that he had been consuming various narcotics and psychotropic drugs for a long time, but examinations showed he was clean at the time of committing the heinous acts. Now let's delve into this complex case from the beginning and trace how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student, and an athlete turned into a drug-dependent madman with an uncontrollable desire to taste human flesh. The golden boy Austin Malcolm Harif was born on December 21st, 1996, in the picturesque resort town of Palm Beach, Florida, and was the eldest of two children in a wealthy and respected family of doctors. His father was a renowned dentist with a network of private dental clinics, while his mother was a leading pharmaceutical specialist. The Harifs lived in a large, luxurious home by the ocean. A year and a half after Austin's birth, the family welcomed a younger child, a daughter named Haley. From a young age, the siblings were very close, calling each other best friends. Despite their privileged upbringing, it didn't mean the children were spoiled. Their parents ensured they received a quality education and supported their holistic development and creative potential. Austin was a straight-A student in school, passionate about playing the guitar, seriously engaged in wrestling and football, and performed in an amateur theater group. He considered himself creative and ambitious. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled the world, spending his vacations in new places each time. In an essay written during his high school years, Austin described himself as a happy and optimistic person, with a vivid imagination capable of conjuring anything he pleased. He also mentioned his perseverance in striving for excellence in academics and sports. However, he acknowledged his shyness as a weakness, which sometimes made it difficult for him to interact with peers. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home to his ex-wife and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new love interest, who soon became his wife. The children stayed with their mother, but their father remained actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, his mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies. An honor student and social outcast, in high school, Austin transformed into a true heartthrob. He grew tall, reaching 6 feet 2 inches, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, Harif remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, which he kept during his teenage years, he wrote about having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. The young man also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy, as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus, where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his freshman year, Harif took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. The young man developed steel muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. Steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular. Others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still, others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. The young man started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a crazy and normal side, and was confused by them. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different people, sometimes changing the tone of his voice, or he could burst into tears mid-recording for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was just making faces at the camera. Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, the young man was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was using some controlled substances and recorded his videos under their influence. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it's unhealthy, and as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Harif might have a dissociative identity disorder. What's wrong with Austin? When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him during that time. Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces. And he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour, he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, his mother decided to have a frank conversation with her son and directly asked him if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year and even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that drove him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Hariff made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own. Being an experienced pharmacist, she took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet, and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks, but the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early on the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate living a few blocks from him. The girl was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which the young man abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Mrs. Hariff and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did the woman decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and shared her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day and, after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which the young man categorically refused. Then the man had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. A disturbing confession. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach, given the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if heading to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously, but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin acted completely normal and natural. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then headed towards a busy highway, planning to cross it inappropriately, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait, and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. Attack on an elderly couple and their neighbor. What unfolded after the young man left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no memory of the events and couldn't believe he was capable of such brutality. Austin walked several miles until he wandered into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage drew his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishcon Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage. Set up like a living room, they had been married for over a quarter of a century, had 3 adult children living on their own, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. But the situation took an unexpected turn. The couple's neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 in the evening, he heard suspicious noises outside. Looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the young man was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As he tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself, and after exiting through the back door, headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home. Moreover, the assailant was now making strange, animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. Fatal assault and gruesome act. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishcon Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns. But he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting the man's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly, and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, the young man claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived, but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, he slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be weed perpetrator. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Fragmented memories. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until a light appeared in the distance. The source of the light turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the woman, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then, drawing a knife, declared he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a man, neighbor Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Harroff continued to assault the woman until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next, at least according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care,
the case of Austin Harroff gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that the young man was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment. This sentiment was shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Harroff's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that the young man's mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion. Such a diagnosis could explain why the young man behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain, but none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed it. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. The young man is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased couple and the injured man have expressed hope in the interviews that Harif will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts.